Hi, boys and girls. We're going to do our ABC chant. If you want to challenge yourself just a little bit, find your paper that looks like this. Here we go. Say it with me. These are claws. Big C, little c. What begins with C? K, k, claws. Claws begins with C. C. This is an eagle. Big E, little e. What begins with E? Eagle. Eagle begins with E. E. If you're not sure what letter it is, you can say your alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. This is a burrow. It is where animals go underground and live. So some animals, like a snake, might go in a burrow under the ground. Here we go. Big B, little b. What begins with B? Burrow. Burrow begins with B. B. This is a stream. We might find a stream in a forest. Big S, little s. What begins with S? Stream. Stream begins with S. S. This picture is of scales. You're going to find scales on different types of animals, and one of the animals that might have it is a snake or a fish. So some reptiles have it, and fish have scales like this on the outside. We have skin, they have scales. Big S, little s. What begins with S? Scales. Scales begins with S. S. This picture is of paws. So the paws are the bottom part, the soft part of an animal's feet down here. Big P, little p. What begins with P? Paws. Paws begins with P. P. This is an acorn. Acorns grow in a tree, and some people would use the acorn inside like you would other kinds of nuts, and so they could make paste with it, and it would be something that that people could eat inside after they prepare it. Big A, little a. What begins with A? And this one we just say A. Acorn. Acorn begins with A. A. A butterfly. Big B, little b. What begins with B? Butterfly. Butterfly begins with B. B. Here's a squirrel. Big S, little s. What begins with S? Squirrel. Squirrel begins with S. S. Right down here, mountain, mountain, down to a dip. The dip in the middle between the mountains is called a valley. Big V, little v. What begins with V? Valley. Valley begins with V. Here is a pine tree. Those are the kinds that we have that are evergreen trees. If you celebrate Christmas, you might have one of these inside your house. Big P, little p, what begins with P? Pine tree. Pine tree begins with P. P. Here's a frog. Big F, little f, what begins with F? Frog. Frog begins with F. F. On this animal, we're going to look right at the top of its head, and these are antlers, and they are used to protect themselves and protect others in other animals that live in their herd. Big A, little a, what begins with A? Antlers. Antlers begin with A. In this one, can you find the animal? The animal is hiding. When an animal hides, we call it camouflage. This word is camouflage. Big C, little c, what begins with C? Camouflage. Camouflage begins with C. Here's some water. Big W, little w, what begins with W? Water. Water begins with W. This person right here is a forest ranger. But let's look at this. That doesn't say F and say F. It must just say ranger. Big R, little r, what begins with R? Ranger. Ranger begins with R. Oh, we didn't find our R. Here's R. This is a hole, and it could be in the side of a mountain or side of a hill. And it's going to be someplace where a bear might go and hibernate, or another animal might go and live inside. It has many different names, but let's look at the clue for what we're going to call it this time. This one has a and this one says den. Big D, little d, what begins with D? Den. Den begins with D. This is a handy little map. It's called a trail map, and when you go to the forest, you can pick this up at the ranger station. And a trail map means that the forest rangers know about these trails, and they help you don't get lost or have trouble. But if you stay on the trails, they know how to that other people have gone on them, and that it's a safer way to go from here to there. And it tells you what you might see along the way. It tells you different kinds of things that you might see. So there's rivers. On some trail maps, they might have different mountain ranges. They're going to have roads for driving on listed. Big T, little t, what begins with T? Trail map. Trail map begins with T. Here's a picture of a mountain. Big M, little m, what begins with M? Mountain. Mountain begins with M. Here's a leaf. Big L, little l, what begins with L? Leaf. Leaf begins with L. Oh, look at that. It even has a leaf on our picture. These are very interesting. Right here in the soil, you can see an animal was there before and isn't there now. These are called animal tracks. Now, some animals are going to leave tracks like this, but if it's a snake, it's going to slither and leave kind of a long S, and then it connected to an S, connected to an S that runs up. So this is animal tracks. Big A, little a. What begins with a? Animal tracks. Animal tracks begin with a. This kind of bear is called a grizzly bear. We can see different things about it that we know. So it has its hump, which is one of the clues that this is a grizzly bear. Big G, little g. What begins with G? Grizzly bear. Grizzly bear begins with G. Here is a nest. Big N, little n. What begins with N? Nest. Nest begins with N. Oh, a nest on our picture too. This has several names. Sometimes we call it a hare or a bunny. Let's see what it starts with. Ooh, it starts with an R. And R says So another name would be rabbit. This says rabbit. Big R, little r. What begins with R? Rabbit. Rabbit begins with R. This animal is called a moose. Right there. Big M, little m. What begins with M? Moose. Moose begins with M. Here's our M. This is a pine cone. Big P, little p. What begins with P? Pine cone. Pine cone begins with P. Here's our P. This is on the outside of a tree. What we call this is bark. Big B, little b. What begins with B? Bark. Bark begins with B. There's our B. This kind of tree is called an oak tree. Big O, little o. What begins with O? And we're just going to say O because it has an A that's telling it to say its name. So O, oak tree. Oak tree begins with O. And this one right here. This is at the bottom of some animals, and this is a hoof. And so some have paws, some have hooves, and we have all sorts of different kinds of bottoms of their feet or legs. Big H, little h. What begins with H? Hoof. Hoof begins with H, and there's our H. Boys and girls, you can take these and then you can extend your learning if you want to and get out your little letters and try and spell it, or get out your whiteboard and watch this and then pause it and then while you're watching it you can write on your whiteboard and practice writing the letters to make these words. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Bye, boys and girls.